You're sitting there right now, just listening to the cadence of my voice. You're processing the subtle pressure waves hitting your eardrums, and your brain is quietly, effortlessly, really translating those physical vibrations into meaning.
It's quite something when you actually pause to think about it.
It is.
Yeah.
And I want you to stop for a moment, wherever you are, and just feel the physical sensation of your own thoughts happening. Sit in that quiet internal space and wonder, is this continuous buzzing loop of anxieties and memories just meat and electricity?
Or is there a ghost in the machine?
Exactly.
Okay.
Because we are going on a rather profound deep dive today. Our mission is to look at the genesis of the modern mind, dissecting this long, utterly brutal intellectual warfare that dismantled the comforting illusion of the divine soul.
And replaced it with the gritty, unapologetic reality of neurobiology, environmental conditioning, and frankly, sheer existential dread.
We are tracking how humanity essentially went mad, trying to figure out what is actually happening inside our own skulls.
It is the ultimate locked room mystery, isn't it? I mean, you find yourself trapped inside this skull, trying to measure the dimensions of your cage using nothing but the instruments provided by the cage itself.
Which is terrifying.
Utterly terrifying. And we have to go back to 17th century Europe to genuinely understand the stakes of this conversation. This isn't just some sterile history of abstract ideas.
No, it's a visceral timeline of human desperation. We are talking about a period defined by the smell of gunpowder, the devastation of plague, and the violent collapse of religious dogma.
Right. The desperation to figure out the mechanics of human consciousness back then was, well, it was literally a matter of life, death, and holding on to one's sanity.
I think we have to start by taking a sledgehammer to the established order. For centuries, humans operated under this deeply comforting assumption that we were pristine, divine vessels.
Pre-programmed with eternal truths handed down from the heavens.
Exactly. And the British empiricists were the first to look at all that theological posturing and simply drag the human mind down into the physical dirt. They argued that you are not born with divine knowledge.
You're a biological entity, full stop.
Right. And the man who swung that hammer with the most ferocity was Thomas Hobbes.
You really cannot isolate Thomas Hobbes from the chaos of his environment. I mean, he lived through the sheer bloody carnage of the English Civil War.
It was absolute societal collapse.
It was. He watched his own countrymen slaughter one another in the mud over abstract ideals and supposed divine rights. When you witness that level of violence, you don't emerge with a flowery, romantic view of the human soul.
You emerge deeply cynical.
Quite. Hobbes looked at the universe and concluded that the non-physical mind, this precious spirit we cling to, is an utter delusion. It's just a comforting fiction.
He advocated for a very strict physical monism, didn't he?
Yes. Absolutely everything in the universe, including human thought, has a concrete physical basis. We are entirely, inescapably biological machines.
A meat machine. He essentially looked at complex human psychology and translated it into crude mechanics.
He did, and he was completely unapologetic about it.
I find his definition of imagination to be one of the most hauntingly poetic descriptions I've ever encountered. He called it decaying sense. Walk me through the actual physical mechanics of what he meant by that.
It's a rather brilliant piece of mechanical translation, actually. Hobbes argued that when you look at an object in the world, let's say a burning candle, the physical light literally strikes your eye.
Like a physical blow.
Exactly. It sets off a chain of mechanical motions in your sensory apparatus, vibrating along the nerves directly into the brain. Now, when you close your eyes or turn away, that physical motion doesn't just instantly stop.
It possesses inertia.
Spot on. It reverberates, much like a struck bell continuing to hum long after the hammer has fallen away. As those physical reverberations in your brain slowly weaken, that lingering, decaying echo is what we mistakenly label as a memory.
Or an imagination. So, when I remember the face of someone I love, I'm not accessing some spiritual archive. I am literally just feeling the dying ripples of a physical impact that happened in the past.
That is precisely what you're feeling, just echoes in the meat.
And by that logic, dreams are just those exact same reverberations running wild in the dark. When your eyes are closed and the external inputs are shut off, the echoes just bounce around the machinery.
It's entirely mechanical. There's no mystery to it for Hobbes.
But here is where I struggle, and where I really have to push back on Hobbes's absolute rigidity. Because if we reduce all human motivation to pure biological hedonism...
Just a basic appetite for pleasure and an aversion to pain.
Right. If that's true, and if free will is entirely an illusion, how do we account for complex original thought? Is the poetry of Shakespeare genuinely just trains of thought linking up because they happen to bump into each other in the physical brain?
I understand the resistance. It feels deeply counterintuitive to our lived experience.
I just refuse to believe a symphony is just falling dominoes.
But according to Hobbes, yes, the symphony is just falling dominoes. We really have to unpack his mechanics of determinism here. What you call will, or choice, is, in his framework, nothing more than the final biological appetite.
The appetite that occurs right before the body physically moves.
Exactly. Imagine you're deciding whether to pour a glass of wine. You feel the tension of the decision. Hobbes would say you aren't making a free choice at all.
You're just witnessing a complex internal calculus.
Right. You're weighing past pleasures associated with wine against the fatigue of the day, against a lingering memory of a terrible hangover. The dominoes are falling inside your nervous system.
And the final domino to tip over is what you mistakenly label as your free will. You are quite literally a spectator to your own biology.
It's a deeply humbling, almost suffocating way to view yourself.
I see the internal consistency of his logic, even if it feels a bit like intellectual suffocation. But that brutal perspective laid the groundwork for someone who operated much more quietly.
Yet proved infinitely more disruptive, really.
John Locke. Locke wasn't screaming about meat machines amidst a civil war, but his architectural shift, the concept of the tabula rasa, or the blank slate, was an absolute earthquake.
Quiet revolutions are quite often the most dangerous kind. Locke argued that we are born with absolutely nothing. No innate ideas, no divine moral compass.
And his reasoning was devastatingly practical, wasn't it?
It was. He pointed out that if we actually possessed innate moral codes pre-installed by a creator, you wouldn't look across the globe and see such a chaotic, contradictory mess of human cultures.
Right, because one culture's sacred binding duty is often another culture's mortal sin.
Precisely. Locke realized the mind is furnished entirely through experience, operating via two primary pipelines: raw physical sensation and internal reflection on those sensations.
He broke the processing down into simple and complex ideas. You experience the raw, simple data through sensation, the color red, the feeling of heat, the smell of sugar.
And your mind then aggressively aggregates those foundational atoms into a complex idea, like an apple.
But the realization Locke introduced that I still find genuinely unsettling is his distinction between primary and secondary qualities. Because he essentially proves that the world you think you're living in doesn't actually exist.
It is the exact moment philosophy pulls the rug out from under human perception. We assume our eyes act as clear windows into an objective reality.
And Locke proved they're nothing of the sort. Let's break that down because it demands a bit of pausing.
Let's do it. Locke said primary qualities, things like shape, solidity, motion, number, those actually exist out there in the physical object.
A square block is actually square, whether you're looking at it or not.
Exactly. But secondary qualities, color, sound, temperature, taste, those do not exist in the physical universe whatsoever. They only exist inside the dark theater of your own skull.
This is what gets me. When a tree falls in the woods, it creates physical pressure waves in the air, yes. But it does not create sound.
Sound is a hallucination generated by your brain interpreting those pressure waves.
The objective universe is entirely silent, completely colorless, and devoid of taste.
It induces a profound sense of alienation from objective reality, does it not? You're sitting in a room right now, looking at the colors on the walls, listening to the pitch of our voices.
And none of it is actually real in the way you intuitively feel it is. It's a psychological rendering.
And yet, for all its abstract terror, Locke's highly empirical approach had massive, tangible implications. By viewing the mind as a product of environmental inputs rather than a fixed divine creation, he anticipated modern behaviorism by centuries.
Give me an example of how that theoretical shift translated into practical behavior back then.
We'll take the education of children. At the time, if a child had an irrational fear of frogs, the standard approach was either harsh physical punishment to beat the fear out of them,
Which is horrific.
or praying over them to cleanse their supposedly corrupted soul. Locke fiercely rejected that. He suggested curing the fear through graduated, slow exposure.
So you bring the frog into the room, but at a distance.
Right. You let the child acclimate, you move it closer the next day. He realized that if you want to change the output of the machine, you have to carefully manipulate the inputs.
You don't punish the hardware. You rewrite the software through structured experience. That is brilliant.
It is, and we literally still use that exact protocol, systematic desensitization in modern therapy today.
But by creating this system, where our internal experience is slightly divorced from physical reality, where color and sound are just arbitrary psychological translations, Locke accidentally opened a rather horrifying philosophical door.
He certainly did.
The next generation of thinkers looked at that terrifying gap between the mind and reality and completely lost their grip. Enter George Berkeley.
Bishop George Berkeley. He is a fascinating figure because his entire philosophy is driven by sheer panic.
He looked at the materialism of Hobbes and the empiricism of Locke, and he felt the deep existential terror. He saw this mechanical worldview rapidly making God obsolete.
So what does he do? He formulates a philosophy so radically airtight and simultaneously so utterly absurd that you almost have to admire the sheer audacity of it.
He decides the only way to save God is to delete physical matter entirely. I genuinely laugh every time I think about his solution because it is the ultimate epistemological ostrich maneuver.
He coins the phrase, esse es percipi to be is to be perceived.
He argued that there is zero empirical proof that physical matter exists independently of a mind perceiving it. We only ever know our perceptions. So I have to ask you, under Berkeley's rules, if I close my eyes, does the physical world just disappear?
That is precisely the logical trap he set for himself. If existence relies on perception, unperceived objects must simply vanish into the void.
Does the chair I am sitting on cease to exist the moment I stand up and walk out of the room?
According to his baseline role, yes. But Berkeley wasn't a fool. He had a failsafe built into this madness, a cosmic loophole, if you will.
And what was the loophole?
The universe does not wink out of existence when you blink, because God is the ultimate infinite observer. God acts as the universal surveillance camera, constantly perceiving everything, everywhere, all at once, to keep reality intact.
It was a desperate theological patch over a gaping philosophical wound. Feels like an elaborate cheat code in a video game.
It really does. But the profound irony is, tucked inside this absolute religious panic, Berkeley actually delivers a genuinely brilliant, highly empirical theory on human vision.
Specifically regarding distance perception.
Yes. Berkeley pointed out a fundamental physiological truth. The retina in the back of our eye is a two-dimensional surface. It has height and width, but no depth whatsoever.
Therefore, our perception of three-dimensional space cannot be an innate, direct translation of reality. It must be a learned association.
Exactly. He argued that as infants, we learn how far away an object is by associating the 2D visual sensation on the retina and the shifting of the muscles controlling our eyes with the physical, tactile effort of walking toward the object.
We build the illusion of 3D space through physical movement over time. It's a remarkably astute observation buried inside a philosophy that completely denies the physical existence of the ground you're walking on.
It's the ultimate paradox. Which brings us to the man who took Berkeley's premise and just brutally stripped away the theological safety net, David Hume.
If Berkeley was the terrified priest trying to glue the universe back together with God, Hume was the cheerful Scottish philosopher who walked into the room, smiled, and snapped the spine of human certainty forever.
He completely refused to use God as the cosmic glue. Hume is where the bottom falls out of the Enlightenment.
He agreed with Berkeley's premise that all we can ever truly know are our own subjective perceptions, didn't he?
He did. But unlike Berkeley, Hume was perfectly comfortable staring into the void. He stated plainly that we can never prove the existence of an external physical world, so we must analyze the mind purely on its own terms.
And he formalized the mechanics of thought into laws of association, resemblance, contiguity, and cause and effect.
Yes, and it is his destruction of that last one cause and effect that gets incredibly heavy.
We build our entire lives, our entire understanding of physics and reality on causation. I drop a glass, it shatters on the floor. The dropping caused the shattering. It's a concrete law.
But Hume says, no, look closer. He demands absolute, uncompromising empirical rigor.
Walk me through how he actually dismantles this.
Hume says, observe the event. You see event A, the glass falling through the air. You see event B, the glass shattering on the floor. But do you ever actually see the causal link itself?
No.
Can you touch causation? Can you measure the invisible force that connects A to B? You cannot. Hume proved that causation is not an observable physical necessity. It is merely a psychological habit.
So my desperate brain has seen A followed by B so many times that it simply assumes they are permanently linked, just to predict the future.
Exactly. We assume the sun will rise tomorrow simply because it always has, not because we can perceive the fundamental mechanism forcing it to do so. Causation is a feeling, not a fact.
That is deeply unsettling because it reduces all of science to just a catalog of very strong mental habits.
It does. But if dismantling the physical universe and causation wasn't enough, he then turns that analytical scalpel inward. He completely guts the concept of the soul or the permanent self.
This is the vertigo you feel when you truly understand Hume. He asks the simple question: when you close your eyes and look inward to find you, to locate your permanent unchanging soul, what do you actually find?
And Hume argued that you never find a core self. You only ever encounter a fleeting bundle of sensations.
A sudden memory, an itch on your arm, a spike of anxiety, passing desire for coffee.
The self is just a linguistic illusion created by the rapid, overlapping succession of these perceptions. You are not a concrete noun holding all these thoughts. You're a chaotic verb. You are the stream itself.
Just a stream of biological data pretending to be a unified person. It's maddening. And his conclusion on how this bundle makes decisions is legendary.
Ah, yes. He wrote that reason is and ought only to be the slave of the passions.
Your intellect is not driving the car. Your biology, your emotions, your raw evolutionary desires, they dictate what you want.
Your vaunted intellect is just the calculator in the passenger seat trying to figure out the most efficient way to get it.
It's a profound shift in how we view human agency. We like to think of ourselves as rational creatures who occasionally suffer from emotional outbursts.
Hume flips it entirely. We are deeply emotional, biologically driven creatures who occasionally rationalize our impulses after the fact.
Let's trace how this British associationism matures, because it doesn't just stop with Hume's skepticism. People tried to build on it, right? You have David Hartley trying to map Locke's psychological ideas onto Isaac Newton's physical laws.
Yes, Hartley and his concept of vibrationcles, which is a fantastic word, really.
It sounds utterly made up.
It does, but he suggested that sensory experiences create lingering physical vibrations in the nervous system. When these vibrations happen simultaneously, say seeing a fire and feeling the heat, they physically fuse together in the brain tissue.
It was a valiant attempt to create a physiological psychology. He argued that complex behaviors, like walking, are just the biological evolution of basic, involuntary muscle reflexes stacking on top of one another.
His specific biology was flawed, of course, but his instinct to ground complex psychology in the physical wiring of the neurology was dead on.
Then we move into the 19th century, and we get the Mills. James Mill built the ultimate rigid mental machine.
He took this utilitarian, hedonistic approach and argued that the strength of our mental associations is based purely on how vivid the experience was and how frequently it occurred.
So we're just stimulus-response robots, programmed entirely by the frequency of data.
Exactly.
It reminds me exactly of how modern social media algorithms work. TikTok feeds you content purely based on the vividness and frequency of your past scrolling, treating you exactly like one of James Mill's robots.
It's the exact same mechanistic philosophy, but his son, John Stuart Mill, stages a rather beautiful intellectual rebellion against his father's robotic worldview.
John Stuart Mill introduces the concept of emergence back into the machine. He argued for what he called mental chemistry.
His father believed that complex thoughts were just simple ideas stacking up like bricks to build a wall. The wall is just a lot of bricks. But John Stuart Mill said, no, sometimes ideas combine like hydrogen and oxygen.
You take two highly combustible gaseous elements, you fuse them, and they create water, something entirely new, with properties completely different from its constituent parts.
The mind can generate novel properties that cannot be predicted just by looking at the raw inputs. It's a massive leap forward.
He also championed psychology as a probabilistic science, much like meteorology. You cannot predict exactly what a human will do with absolute certainty, but there are strong underlying laws of probability.
And we really must acknowledge the immense influence of his wife, Harriet Taylor, here. The fact that J.S. Mill pushed for such radical social reforms, fiercely recognizing women as intellectual equals.
In a deeply archaic, patriarchal time.
Exactly. It shows an ability to step outside the rigid environmental conditioning of his era, an ability his predecessors completely lacked.
The culmination of this British lineage is Alexander Bain. He is the great synthesizer of the era. He took everything that came before and tightly fused the physiological with the psychological.
Yes, I'm particularly fond of Bain's law of constructive association because it finally explains human creativity within a mechanical framework.
Right, because if we are just machines reacting to inputs, how does an artist create something that has never existed before?
Bain says the mind has the active ability to spontaneously rearrange past associations into completely novel configurations. We're not just tape recorders playing back reality.
We have an internal mixing board. We can remix our experiences into new realities.
It's a highly sophisticated model, but whilst the British were slowly, politely refining this biological machine, always keeping a polite distance from outright atheism, the French took a different path.
The French sensationalists, they looked at empiricism and drove it to its most ruthless, godless extreme. This is where the conversation gets gritty, uncompromising, and stripped of all apology.
We have figures like Pierre Gassendi looking at Descartes' mind-body dualism and basically calling it intellectual cowardice. We are complex physical machines, full stop.
And Julien de La Mettrie took that premise and ran with it in his infamous work, Man, a Machine. He argued there is zero spiritual difference between a human being and an ape.
It's purely a matter of brain size, wiring, and structural complexity. But what's genuinely fascinating about La Mettrie is his moral argument. He wasn't trying to degrade humanity by comparing us to clockwork.
No, he argued that accepting we are meat machines would actually create a far kinder, more empathetic society.
Which is such a counterintuitive point.
It is. Wait, pull that apart for me. How does reducing humans to biological machines lead to more empathy?
Because if you remove the eternal soul, you remove the entire concept of sin. You stop torturing yourself and others with religious guilt.
Under La Mettrie's framework, if someone commits a crime or does something horrific, it's not because they have a corrupted, evil soul that deserves eternal hellfire.
Exactly. It's because their biological programming is malfunctioning, or their environmental conditioning was severely flawed. It shifts the societal response away from divine punishment and vengeance toward practical empathy.
Rehabilitation. Fixing the machine instead of torturing the ghost. It's an incredibly modern, almost neurological view of criminal justice.
It really is. And to prove just how this mechanical mind could evolve from scratch, Etienne Bonneau de Condillac gave us one of the most brilliant, chilling thought experiments in the history of philosophy.
The sentient statue.
Yes, it's a beautiful distillation of the entire sensationalist problem. Condillac says, imagine a perfectly carved marble statue. It has no mind, no soul, no innate ideas whatsoever.
Now, you endow that statue with exactly one sense. The sense of smell.
Precisely. So you hold a single rose under the marble statue's nose. The statue experiences the scent of the rose. Because it is the only input existing in its universe, that scent consumes its entire being.
That total absorption is the birth of attention.
Now you take the rose away. A lingering trace, an echo of the scent, remains in the statue's system. That is the birth of memory.
Then you introduce a second scent, perhaps a rotting piece of meat.
The statue holds the current scent of the meat and compares it to the memory of the rose. That comparison is the birth of judgment.
Through one single, solitary sensory channel, Condillac showed how full, complex consciousness, attention, memory, and judgment could spontaneously assemble themselves from raw data.
It's chillingly elegant. It really makes you realize how mechanically we might be built.
But then Claude Helvetius takes this sensory plasticity, this idea that we are purely shaped by inputs, and weaponizes it into radical environmental determinism. This is where the philosophy gets genuinely terrifying.
Helvetius argued that every single human is born with the exact same intellectual capacity.
The only difference between a profound genius and an absolute fool is the environment they were subjected to, which means if you have absolute totalitarian control over a child's education and environment from birth,
you can engineer the perfect citizen. It is the ultimate wet dream of every utopian dictator in history.
It attempts to remove the messy, frustrating unpredictability of human nature and replace it with sheer, cold engineering.
It is the exact philosophical precursor to some of the most oppressive, mind-controlling regimes of the 20th century. If the state controls the inputs, the state owns the mind.
Which bleeds perfectly into positivism. We move into the 19th century, and there's this overwhelming demand that we stop talking about ghosts, souls, and abstract metaphysics.
And only deal with the rigorously observable. Science essentially becomes the new god.
Auguste Comte was a fanatic for this movement. He created the law of 3 stages to explain the evolution of human culture.
We start in the theological stage, where we are terrified children explaining thunderstorms as the wrath of angry gods. Then we mature slightly into the metaphysical stage,
replacing gods with invisible forces and abstract philosophical principles.
Finally, we evolve into the scientific or positivist stage where we stop asking why things happen, because that implies a purpose, and focus purely on how they happen, meticulously predicting and controlling the observable facts.
He was so utterly obsessed with this sterile scientific worldview that he literally tried to invent a secular religion of humanity.
He wanted people to congregate and worship scientific progress, complete with positivist saints and rituals instead of deities.
It's almost comical, the sheer desperation to replace the gaping void left by God with a spreadsheet in a laboratory. But contrast Comte's naive certainty with Ernst Mach's phenomenalism.
Mach was far more sophisticated and, frankly, far more unsettling than Comte. Mach didn't even believe we could observe a concrete physical reality.
He pointed out that scientists are not measuring the real world. They are only ever measuring the mathematical relationships between their own sensory stimuli.
It's a proto-matrix logic. When a physicist studies a particle, they aren't studying the universe. They're studying the human nervous system's highly specific reaction to the universe.
Science is just the study of our own sensory limitations. Let's shift the energy here, because reading through all of this empiricism and sensationalism, you start to feel like a passive victim.
You do, just getting battered by sensory inputs.
Right. If we were just blank slates, relentlessly battered by these inputs, how do we structure the chaos? Why isn't human experience just a blinding, deafening blur of noise? This is where the rationalists step into the ring.
They argue that the mind isn't a passive bucket. It has inherent biological architecture that dictates how we experience reality.
And the prophet of this massive counterstrike was Baruch Spinoza, a man so intellectually dangerous to the religion dogmas of the 17th century that he was completely excommunicated from his own community.
Spinoza argued for strict pantheism. God is not some bearded patriarch sitting on a throne, judging you from the clouds. God is nature. God is the absolute, terrifying, all-encompassing totality of the physical universe.
And he obliterated the mind-body split, the idea that the soul and the flesh are separate, with what's called double-aspect monism.
He said the mind and the body aren't two different things interacting. They are two sides of the exact same coin.
A physiological process happening in the body, say, your heart rate spiking and cortisol flooding your veins, and a psychological feeling in the mind, the feeling of panic, are the identical event.
They are just the same event viewed from two different perspectives, which means, once again, free will is entirely eradicated.
Spinoza argued that you only think you have free will because you're consciously aware of your surface desires, but you are completely blissfully ignorant of the millions of biological, environmental, and historical causes that generated those desires in the first place.
You feel the urge, but you don't see the strings pulling you.
But his understanding of human emotion is where his work becomes incredibly relevant even today. He talked extensively about the conatus, this ruthless, innate will of every single organism to simply survive, to persist in its own being.
And he meticulously mapped out how our emotions tie directly into this biological imperative. Clear, reasoned emotion empowers us, it aids our survival, and expands our capacity to act.
But passive passions, when we are just reacting blindly to external forces, consumed by rage or jealousy, they actively diminish our power. They're a failure of the organism.
And this is precisely why Spinoza is hailed as a hero by modern effective neuroscientists like Antonio Damasio. Spinoza prefigured the biological reality that our mental feelings are quite literally physical body maps.
And more importantly for our daily lives, Spinoza realized that you cannot defeat a destructive passion with pure, cold logic.
You cannot just think your way out of a deep clinical depression or a raging substance addiction. A mathematical equation cannot defeat a biological urge.
The only way to overcome a destructive emotion is by generating a stronger, opposing emotion. That insight is the entire foundation of deep, modern psychotherapy. You have to fight fire with a bigger, better fire, not with a lecture.
It's brilliant. Now, moving from Spinoza to Leibniz. Leibniz directly attacks Locke's concept of the blank slate.
He says no. The mind is not a blank piece of paper waiting for the world to write on it. The mind is a block of veined marble.
The environment, our experience in the world, is the sculptor wielding the chisel. The chisel strikes the stone. But the innate veins running through that marble, our biological, cognitive architecture, dictate the final shape the statue can actually take.
You cannot just carve anything you want out of a piece of veined marble. The stone has a pre-existing structural bias. It will break along certain lines. You are constrained by the hardware.
To put that in modern terms, think about how that actually manifests in human beings. The most famous modern validation of Leibniz's concept is Noam Chomsky's work on linguistics.
If we were truly blank slates, human languages across the globe would be entirely random and structurally chaotic. But they aren't.
Every human language, regardless of how isolated the culture, shares an underlying deep syntax. Children don't just passively mimic words, their brains actively impose grammatical rules on the sounds they hear.
The veins in our neural marble are pre-configured to process language in a highly specific, structured way. That makes perfect sense.
It's like pre-installed operating system parameters. You can download whatever apps you want. You can have totally different cultural experiences from the person next to you, but the software still has to run on the basic laws of iOS.
The foundational code is innate. But Leibniz's most haunting contribution to psychology has to be the birth of the unconscious mind.
The concept of Petit's perceptions. Leibniz argued that we are constantly, relentlessly bombarded by tiny, unconscious sensory events.
Think of standing on a rocky beach. You can't consciously hear the sound of a single microscopic drop of water hitting the sand. It's too faint. It remains below the threshold of awareness.
It's unconscious. But when millions of those unconscious drops accumulate and hit the shore simultaneously, they cross a threshold, and suddenly you experience the massive, conscious, roaring apperception of the ocean wave.
It's the terrifying realization that 99% of what your brain is doing is happening in the dark, without your permission, and you only get handed the final, highly edited, conscious summary report.
It's deeply unsettling.
Now, I want to briefly examine Thomas Reid and his philosophy of common sense before we get to the absolute heavyweight Immanuel Kant.
Reid basically looked at Hume's extreme skepticism, this idea that we cannot prove reality exists or that causation is real, and said, this is intellectual poison and it's practically useless.
Reid was a deeply pragmatic thinker. He argued that if our perception was fundamentally a total illusion, the human species would have walked off a cliff and gone extinct 1 million years ago.
The simple fact that we successfully survive, hunt, and navigate the physical world is proof enough that our senses are generally trustworthy.
He championed what's called faculty psychology, arguing the brain has distinct, specialized modules for different tasks. A module for memory, a module for spatial judgment, a module for moral sense.
Which, interestingly enough, modern neuroscience has largely vindicated. The brain isn't a uniform sponge, it's highly modular.
But the man who truly synthesized this brutal war between the empiricists, who said everything comes from sensory experience, and the rationalists, who said we have innate structural concepts, was Immanuel Kant.
Kant built the bridge between the two schools, but it's a deeply unsettling bridge to cross. Kant agreed with the empiricists that all knowledge must begin with sensory experience. Without data, the mind is empty.
But he argued, knowledge doesn't end there. The mind is equipped with innate active categories, built-in filters like cause and effect, unity, totality.
Our mind actively, aggressively structures and organizes the incoming sensory chaos.
But wait, explain how he proves that. How does he prove that something like space or time is an innate category of the mind, rather than just a physical property of the universe we are observing?
It requires a brilliant thought experiment. Kant asks you to try and imagine an object, say a box. You can imagine a box. Now try to imagine that box existing, but without any space around it or inside it.
You can't do it. The concept of the box collapses.
Conversely, you can easily imagine empty space with absolutely no objects in it. Therefore, Kant concludes, space is not a thing we discover in the world. Space is the pre-existing, innate grid our mind uses to map the world.
The same goes for time. You cannot experience a thought without it possessing duration. Space and time are the software language the human brain uses to render data.
Let that sit for a second. Time and space are just the user interface of human consciousness.
And the profound cost of this structuring is that we never, ever experience the objective universe.
The real world, what Kant called the noumenal realm, is forever locked away from us behind our biological filters.
We only ever experience the phenomenal realm, the highly edited, psychologically rendered virtual reality version of the universe that our brain projects for us.
It is an incredibly isolating, solipsistic thought. Even time and space themselves, without a human mind to perceive and structure them, simply do not exist in the way we understand them.
The universe in itself is unknowable. Now, from Kant's heavily structured mind, we get this explosion of complex architectural models of psychology.
You have Hegel looking at the universe as a massive dynamic whole evolving through the dialectic, this constant grinding process of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. Ideas clashing, destroying each other, and merging to form higher truth.
But Johann Herbart is where things get genuinely cinematic and mechanical. He wanted to elevate psychology into a rigorous mathematical science akin to Newtonian physics.
He introduced this concept of psychic mechanics. He modeled the human mind like a gravitational battlefield. Ideas aren't just inert files sitting in a cabinet waiting to be read. They are active, living entities with their own gravitational mass and kinetic energy.
I absolutely love this visual model. He called it the apperceptive mass. Imagine all the ideas you are currently conscious of, right in this very second, forming this tight, cohesive, gravitational mass in the bright center of your mind.
Now, imagine a new idea enters your mind. If that new idea is compatible with the existing mass, say, a new fact about a subject you already love, it is easily absorbed into the cluster.
But what happens if a radically incompatible idea enters the system? A deeply traumatic memory, a contradictory religious belief, a taboo sexual desire.
The apperceptive mass violently repels it. It physically pushes the incompatible idea down, expelling it beneath the threshold of consciousness, banishing it into the dark underneath.
It is literally the architectural blueprint for Sigmund Freud's entire theory of repression, built a full century before Freud even wrote a single word.
The mind is a literal battleground where ideas are constantly fighting for the spotlight of consciousness, and the losers are shoved into the basement.
But they don't die down there. They stay alive, humming with kinetic energy, waiting for a moment of weakness to break back out into the light.
And that profound tension brings us to the final, and frankly, the darkest and most emotional chapter of this timeline.
Because the Enlightenment, with all its sterile rationality, its mechanistic science, its mathematical models of the mind, and its obsession with logic, it created a violent, desperate cultural backlash.
Humans are not math equations. We are messy, bleeding, suffering, deeply passionate creatures.
Blood, sweat, and dread. The Romantics and the existentialists step up and declare an all-out war against cold reason.
Jean-Jacques Rousseau looks at this concept of the mind as machine and feels absolute disgust. He says passion, not sterile logic, is what truly defines us. To live solely by reason is to live a mutilated, half-dead life.
Rousseau championed the concept of the noble savage. He believed that humans are born fundamentally good, inherently empathetic, and deeply connected to nature.
It is the artificial cold constructs of civilization, private property, and rigid societal rules that mutate us into greedy, anxious, hyper-competitive creatures.
He demanded a radical return to natural, unstructured ways of living and learning, a rebellion against the spreadsheet. Then you have Goethe, the phenomenological giant.
He was obsessed with polarities, love and hate, creation and destruction, light and dark.
You do not try to eliminate the dark side of your psyche with a neat little rational equation or a moral lecture. You have to synthesize it.
You have to actively integrate the chaos into your life to be a whole person. This profoundly influenced Carl Jung's later work on archetypes and integrating the shadow self.
But if the Romantics found solace in nature in the embrace of pure emotion, the existentialists looked into the exact same void and offered absolutely zero comfort.
Arthur Schopenhauer might well be the philosopher of ultimate misery.
Oh, he's the undisputed king of the bleak.
Yeah.
Schopenhauer looked at all this rationalist posturing and said the universe is not driven by logic, nor is it driven by a benevolent God.
It is driven by a blind, irrational, insatiable force, the will to survive. And humans are just meat puppets violently yanked around by this biological imperative.
He argued something deeply pessimistic, that human intelligence is actually a tragic evolutionary accident.
The smarter an organism is, the more fully it comprehends the profound futility, the ceaseless suffering, and the inevitable death inherent in existence. To be a genius is simply to suffer in high definition.
We swing violently like a pendulum between the sheer agony of unmet desire and the crushing, suffocating boredom of finally getting what we want. Think about how true that is in modern life.
The pendulum of suffering and boredom. You obsess over getting a promotion, you suffer, you stress, you sacrifice your health for it, you finally get it.
1 week later, the thrill is entirely gone and you are just bored, looking for the next thing to suffer over. Is this why his philosophy is so hard to swallow? Because there is no redemption arc?
He offers no comfort. His only solutions are temporary escapes, losing yourself momentarily in music or art or ascetic starvation, literally trying to starve the biological will into submission. It's an incredibly tough pill to swallow.
It is remarkably abrasive. People generally require a philosophy that offers some glimmer of hope or progress. Søren Kierkegaard offered a different kind of desperation.
Kierkegaard rejected the sterile, abstract machinery of his time, but he also rejected Schopenhauer's pure nihilism. He said truth isn't found in a laboratory, and it isn't found in a logical proof.
Truth is a terrifying, highly subjective, passionate internal commitment, the famous leap of faith.
Exactly. He mapped out this brutal, necessary progression of human existence. You start in the aesthetic stage, pure hedonism, living for the moment, chasing pleasure.
But that inevitably hollows you out and leads to profound despair. So to save yourself, you move to the ethical stage. You adopt rigid societal rules, duties, and moral codes to find meaning.
But eventually that too feels dead, mechanical, and restrictive. The final stage, the religious stage, requires an absurd, illogical, terrifying personal relationship with the divine.
It requires stepping off the cliff in the dark, without any empirical proof to catch you. Which brings us to the absolute climax of this intellectual bloodbath, Friedrich Nietzsche.
The man who delivered the ultimate, brutal diagnosis of the modern world. God is dead.
And it is absolutely crucial to understand that this was not a triumphant atheist boast. It was a horrifying warning.
Nietzsche saw that the Enlightenment's obsessive rationality and scientific dismantling of the physical world had slowly, irreparably eroded the foundations of religious authority.
Humanity had lost its universal objective moral compass. And he realized that without that compass, nihilism, the crushing belief in absolutely nothing, was going to consume the 20th century in blood.
Unless we evolved. He looked at the human psyche and saw two competing forces: the Apollonian, the drive for order, structure, rationality, boundaries, and the Dionysian, the chaos, the passion, the ecstatic destruction, the primal urge.
He said you have to integrate both. You cannot just be a sterile, well-behaved robot, and you cannot be a wild, destructive animal. You have to harness the chaos to fuel your order.
He fiercely rejected Schopenhauer's depressing will to survive, and
Yeah.
Nietzsche said, no, survival is the bare minimum. The fundamental drive of life is the will to power.
The drive to master oneself, to overcome obstacles, to exert your creative will on the universe, to grow. And the ultimate expression of that is the Ubermensch.
The Superman, or the Overman. The individual who looks into the terrifying void of a godless, indifferent universe, completely masters their own internal Dionysian chaos, vehemently rejects the weak, comfortable, conformist herd mentality of society.
And forcefully creates their own radical self-determined meaning. It is a philosophy of profound, almost terrifying individual responsibility and aesthetic beauty. You are the author of your own morality.
And the historical tragedy is how grotesquely this profound idea was perverted. After Nietzsche collapsed into madness and eventually died, his anti-Semitic sister took his unpublished writings, bastardized them, stripped away the nuance, and weaponized them.
The Nazis took a philosophy that was fundamentally about internal self-mastery, artistic self-creation, and individual excellence, and mutated it into a sickening political ideology of biological supremacy, eugenics, and external domination.
It stands as one of the greatest crimes in intellectual history.
It is the ultimate contrast of the era. The Romantics wanted to merge back into a harmonious, loving nature to find peace in the trees.
The existentialists looked at the exact same universe, realized it's completely indifferent and deeply absurd, and accepted the excruciating, terrifying burden of being completely, inescapably free to define themselves.
Let's bring it down. Let the immense weight of all this settle in the room. We have spent this time tracking the absolute warfare over what it actually means to be a conscious entity.
We stripped away the divine eternal soul with Hobbes. We rebuilt the mind as a biological machine driven by crude appetite.
We discovered with Locke that the vivid colors and sounds of your life are merely internal hallucinations. We built a mathematical model with Herbart of ideas going to war in the dark basement of our subconscious.
We stared into the bleak void of existential dread with Schopenhauer and Nietzsche.
The profound realization here is that everything you casually consider your identity, your deeply held beliefs, your sensory perception of the room you are sitting in right now, is a fragile, chaotic construct. It is the end result of centuries of intellectual bloodshed and physiological rewiring.
And it leaves us with a rather raw, uncompromising perspective on our daily lives. If you genuinely take these thinkers seriously, you can never look at your own passing thoughts, your own sudden anxieties, or your own desires in quite the same way again.
You see the machinery humming beneath the surface. So I'm going to leave you with a final, lingering thought to chew on in the dark tonight.
If Johann Herbart was right, that our mind is a violent battleground where incompatible, terrifying ideas are ruthlessly pushed down into the unconscious to preserve our sanity.
And if Nietzsche was right, that true self-mastery requires us to stop hiding in the herd and actually integrate our most chaotic Dionysian passions to our conscious lives. What parts of your own reality are you currently repressing just to comfortably get through the day?
Are you actively running the architecture of your own life? Or are you just letting the biological machine run you?
In the end, that might be the only question that actually matters. We'll leave it there for tonight. Take care of your meat machines. We'll see you in the deep end next time.